What kinds of insights reveal themselves or new paths emerge when various things like music, neuroscience, psychology, and deep, wise life experience intersect?
Our bodies and brains are very electrical, and in our Western cultures, we like to think of ourselves as being very biological. And we are biological, but we're much more than biological.
Welcome to the Frequency Files. Thanks for joining us as we explore the vibrations, forms, and creations and mechanisms behind them that inform the nature of existence. Today we have the delight of speaking with a trailblazing psychologist, musician, neuroscientist, and thought leader, Dr. Barbara Minton. She works at the powerful intersection of music, neuroscience, and emotional healing. And she's someone who's just dedicated her career to harnessing the therapeutic power of music and drawing on both rigorous scientific expertise and profound personal experience with great love and devotion. Barb, you are a woman of many talents, and I'm so thrilled to have you here on the show today. Thank you so much for joining.
Lovely to be connected to you today.
So, can you share a little bit about your professional journey and what led you to where you are today?
Long, long ago, when I was an undergraduate in school, I was a music major, and with the very trendy instrument of pipe organ. And I kind of burned out on music by my junior year. And luckily for me, I found psychology, which I was just also quite fascinated by, and became a psychology major, went to graduate school, got a PhD. And then for many years, I actually did music alongside that for quite a while. And then for many years, I did other things. So I got to work in rural mental health with Alaska Natives up in the villages in Alaska. I got to get a float plane and fly my float plane around Alaska. That was so much fun. Got
Oh.
to be a college professor up there. And I moved back to Idaho, where I'm originally from, and worked with gifted and highly gifted people there. And then I got into neurofeedback. And neurofeedback is really a type of brain training where you look at people's EEG. So our brain has neurons in them. Those neurons actually fire and create electricity, and they're all networked. I mean, the brain is amazing when you think about it. There's billions and billions of these neurons, and they all organize themselves to fire in patterns to get things done. So they fire in one pattern if you're cooking dinner, they fire in another pattern if you're playing the piano, they fire in another pattern if you're walking down the street. And that's what allows us to do all the complicated things. Think about physics, right? All these
Mm.
complicated things that people can do. And you can actually image the patterns that someone's brain is firing in, and if they're stuck in a state, let's say insomnia or depression or anxiety, you can actually use neurofeedback to make the brain more flexible and nudge it out of that state and into a state that's more regulated. So I learn all this stuff about EEG and neurofeedback, and I start thinking to myself, um, the brain patterns itself after musical input. So, could we actually curate music? Could we compose music to help the brain regulate itself? And that's really kind of how all these threads of my life came together at this time to ask this question. And so I worked with an amazing guitarist, Peppino D'Agostino, who has played in, I don't know, over 35 countries. He's really a virtuosic guitarist. And together we worked to compose this music to help regulate the brain. And then I did pre and post imaging of people listening to the songs to see if it actually worked. So that's kind of the thread of the short version of the
Yeah,
thread of things that came together.
absolutely. And obviously you've got a PhD as well. So was that work connected into your PhD? Like what was the thesis that you did?
That's kind of another thread. So my PhD, my dissertation was on how do kids learn to think about themselves in a certain way, and that really came from this other part of me that I've always been very interested in women's issues and how people learn to think about themselves. And I remember clearly when I was in college being in the elevator with three other women, and they're all like, "Oh, I'm terrible at math," or "I'm not that good at English." Well, I clearly know like these women all are getting A's, they're brilliant. And I'm like, what is this discrepancy between how people think about themselves and the real data that's out in the world, that they're getting feedback? And it turns out there's a whole literature on this. But anyway, so my dissertation was really trying to unpack some of that about what's that discrepancy between the reality of who we are in this world and who we think we are in this world.
Hmm.
But that, yeah, that is a little different
Okay,
path than
maybe that's a conversation for another
that's
time.
another conversation, yeah.
Yeah, and I'd love to go back to that at some point because I think that's really important, particularly for parents or for all of us reparenting ourselves in our journey through life.
It is, and one of the workshops actually that I did this last June was kind of how to re-find your authentic self and connect to that through using non-performance based, not trying to be good at anything, but just sort of using music, writing, and art as ways of connecting to who your authentic self, sort of the next
Love
emanation of who
it.
you can be in this world. And so that's also really fun on the music side because Pepino did it with me last time, and we just like in front of everybody, we're like, let's make up some music and just experimented and saw what that told us about ourselves, about how we worked with each other, just all kinds of stuff. And how does that apply, say, to your life? Like, what do you learn when people put themselves out there and start experimenting with who they can be in this world? It's very interesting because most of us don't get a chance to do that, right? We're constrained by the demands of our everyday life, our work, our child rearing, all these other things. And it's lovely to have some time to just open up into who you can really be.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it helps to carve out that space to step into maybe a new part of us that we can then anchor really physically into the world as we go forward.
Exactly. And how do you embody this in a grounded way so that in the midst of all these other demands, you still can hang on to who you are and your own path in this world? Um, and it doesn't mean you can't do these other things, but it makes such a difference when you ground yourself in your own being or your own presence, I guess I would say.
Mm, mm.
But totally different conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Segue, sorry.
I'm like, I kind of like, ooh, it'd be fun to go down that road.
All right, round two, we'll do that.
Yeah, exactly.
So, as your work as a neuroscientist, musician, and all-round amazing woman, what do you wish people knew about the potentials that lie when these synergies meet?
Thank you for asking that question. And I'll tell you, it's been part of my own journey is that I was astounded when I started reading the scientific literature on music. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. And it's still amazing to me that this information isn't out there in the real world. It's all stuck in these academic journals and that basically very few people are reading except other academics who don't
Yeah.
have a chance to implement it either. But I started reading this and it's like music makes your heart beat more regularly. It helps your immune system activate. It helps you go to sleep at night. It helps your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, your kind of activation and relaxation system, come together in an embodied way. Um, it helps neonatal intensive care unit babies breathe better and gain weight faster. It reduces depression by 40 to 50%. Like, I'm reading this stuff and I'm like, oh my gosh, why are we not doing something about this? And that realization is was so powerful to me. So this is what I would most like people to know, is how powerful music can be, and then how you can use music, which is so accessible and so cheap, to change your own life.
So, Barb, you put together an album. Could you tell us more about the construction of that album? And
Yeah, so I started thinking about EEG and how people get stuck in certain states. So our brain is actually networked, and a network in the brain is kind of like airplanes, like we have the London airport and the Rome airport and the Melbourne airport, and we have, like, these are all giant nodes, and planes, information gets transmitted between these nodes, and when these nodes get stuck, I guess I'll say, so, like, when Heathrow has a terrible snowstorm and it closes down, everything else gets affected. So I started thinking, I know the frequencies that are stuck when people have insomnia, chronic pain, migraine, stress. And if we put music in, because the brain is trying to pattern this, then we should be able to unstick those nodes. Or at least I asked that question, can we unstick these nodes? And there's a lot of elements to this. So one of them is just tempo. So if you want to calm the brain down, you want to go to a slower kind of pace tempo. Another one is timbre, and timbre is the color of an instrument. So, you can take an oboe and play the exact same note on an oboe and a trumpet, but your brain is going to encode those differently, right? Like, a trumpet is much more enlivening, an oboe is much more settling. So that's timbre. And then we want to look at harmonies, the kinds of harmonies the brain likes. Like, if anybody knows about music, the brain likes thirds and fifths. It doesn't so much like two notes played together as a calming. I mean, that might be interesting in another network, but in the calming networks, we don't tend not to like that. And then there's phrasing. Phrasing is just like the phrasing of a sentence. If I talk like this and I keep going on and I never bring my sentence to an end, and then I keep saying other things like that, after a while your brain just goes, what is going on here? Like, we like to hear the phrasing in words and sentences in a certain way, and that makes our brain feel good. So there's all these kind of, I think I had like 7 or 8 of these variables, and I don't know which ones worked. I was just like, well, I'm going to throw them all in there because I'm just trying to get an effect. We'll see what happens.
yeah,
And so Peppino brought some existing compositions that he had, and then we revised those compositions based on these parameters and recorded them. And then I did pre and post brain imaging when people listened to them. And I was just like, holy cow, like, I can't believe this actually worked. And if people want to go to the website, it's musicandhealing.net. And if you go to the little tab that says new album and scroll down, I posted some of the images on the website so people can take a look at them. They're really cool to see.
amazing, amazing, beautiful. Yeah, and that's so cool that you did those pre and post images so that there's that.
Yeah, and when you do science, I mean, I've things never work out the first time. That's part of science. You just don't expect it. You expect, oh, I did this, I'm going to get some feedback, and then I'll change, and then I'll get. And to see that this worked out the gate, it was just so stunning for me. I couldn't believe it. Now, it didn't work for 100% of the people. We only, I just have case series data, so we took 10 people. And because there's hundreds of thousands of variables to look at on this stuff. But we actually had one brave person who came in with a migraine, and her migraine went away when she listened to the music, and it stayed gone for 3 or 4 hours afterwards. And I mean, like, it
Yeah.
could have been coincidence, but I saw the changes in the brain networks, and to me, the logic of it, that when this music started, the brain networks changed, and then she reported the headache went away.
Mm,
It's very intriguing.
mm. What role does vagal tone have in this?
I wish I could answer that question. I can speculate on
Hmm.
that, which is that, um, well, vagal tone has a role in almost everything, I guess I would say. But when you think about pain, you know, and do you want me to segue and talk a little bit about the pain network in the brain?
Sure.
Because it's a really interesting story, actually. And the first time I heard it, I was like, oh, that makes total sense. So we have at least two networks identified in the brain. We have the actual pain network, and then we have the suffering network. So the pain network is the registration of pain, and then the suffering network is how much you suffer from the pain. So, we can have pain and it doesn't bother us. Many of us, that if we know something, oh, this is my old leg injury, and I just ignore it and go out and do what I want to anyway because I know it's fine, that you're not suffering so much. So that's the suffering network. What's really interesting about the pain network itself is that our brain learns pain. So if I said to you, what's 2 times 5? You're going to say 10, right? You're not going to laboriously try to figure it out. And the reason is that your brain has actually learned that. And what learning means here is that your brain is sensitized to that 2 times 5. It's created a sensitive neural pathway. So you actually have more neurons that have grown together to make that happen automatically. Well, this is what happens with pain. So the brain will learn pain. And then, because it's learned the pain, even if the input goes away, the brain will still register the pain. And if the input hasn't gone away, the brain will still register the pain more robustly than it would otherwise if the pain were new, let's say in chronic pain, because it's learned, oh, this input means that I should activate my pain network. So pain is really complicated. And if you look at things like chronic back pain, one of the really interesting findings in this domain is that you'll see two people whose backs look completely horrible. One of them will have all kinds of pain, and the other person will be like, no, I'm fine. I have no pain at all. Because the pain is happening in the brain. And you see this a lot with amputees, right? Where you have phantom limb pain. We know there's no sensory input, but the brain is like, there's supposed to be input here. So um, I'm going to create this input and see it as itching or see it as pain. So this pain network's fascinating. And when you think about chronic pain specifically, so if we put music in that tells that chronic pain network, oh, actually, just decrease your registration a little bit, don't suffer so much from it, then things change for people. And there actually are good studies that show that if people listen to music over time, research studies, not using our music, but using music, that show that it'll reduce chronic pain over time. And the brain will hang on to that. I mean, it's just so fascinating how plastic our brains are.
Yeah. Is that in tandem with doing mindset work or any other
These
therapy?
studies, they mostly just do one thing, and then
Yeah,
whatever somebody's doing in their life outside that, it's not
sure.
even tracked, so we
Yeah,
don't know. And
yeah.
what would be really interesting would be to go back, because whenever you do a study, you see an average result. You don't see like one person got amazing effect and the other person got, nah, not so much. And wouldn't it be interesting to go back and talk to that person who got the
Yeah.
amazing effect and say, what else were you doing,
Yeah.
that added into this? Because we know things like mindfulness make a difference. We know things like distraction make a difference. If you sit around and focus on your pain all the time, it hurts
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But if you're a busy mom and you have to get up and get the kids dressed and to
Yeah.
school and all this stuff, you do it, and the registration in the brain lowers because it knows it has a task to get done. I mean, the brain's just it's so incredibly fascinating in so many ways.
Mm.
So in our case, what I was really, because these networks, so the chronic pain, insomnia, and migraine network are linked. When you have chronic pain, you don't sleep, right? So you can kind of see how these networks work together. Uh, can we hit all these networks with similar input to help them normalize? And that's what we've been doing. We
Fascinating.
just we just did the coolest workshop here in California a couple weekends ago, and a lady came up to me afterwards because live music, I love doing this live because live music has more of an impact on the limbic centers, the emotional centers of the brain, than recorded music does.
Okay.
And a lady came up to me and she said she had been listening to the album and she had started to sleep. But she came up and said, doing it live. I said, well, how was it live versus, just listening? And she said, live. She said, no comparison. She said, my mind calmed. It stayed calm all afternoon, all night, all through the next day until noon. And she said it was like being a different person. All that busy brain was gone.
Mm,
And that's just the power of music.
mm, mm.
And think about if you added in all the other things that we know that help regulate your system. I mean, you could really. I actually did training as an epigenetic coach to look at all these other factors, and there's so many things we can do to help ourselves nest in our optimal state. And when you start combining these things, then you get a really powerful effect. But that's also another conversation.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm.
music isn't gonna, you know, cure you of something, right? If you live on chips and pasta and cokes, and then you're like, "Oh, I can't sleep. I think I'll play music." Like, no, that isn't going to work. You
Yeah,
have to tend yourself in these other ways also.
yeah, 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 sure. It's a holistic approach
Yeah.
for sure. I'm so curious, given that you've got experience working and studying and uh, teaching various expressions of frequency, right? Because this is frequency files, and I'm curious about what frequency means to different people. And you've played in different spaces where frequency might have different meanings. So, in your world, what does frequency mean?
Oh man. That's such a killer question. Wow. So, uh, let me see. So, let me start at we have these scientific ideas of frequency. So in physics, we know there's all these frequencies we're not even aware of. In physics, some people talk about 14 or 15 frequencies that are outside human awareness that are probably affecting us. I mean, there's so many energetic planes that it's not even a controversy anymore. It's just science. So we have that. We have the frequencies that we're aware of, say the frequencies in music or the frequencies that the brain is making, or you have the solfeggio frequencies or 432 hertz or 440 or 442 hertz, all these frequencies. I guess one thing I'll say that kind of goes along with this is our bodies and brains are very electrical, and in our Western cultures we like to think of ourselves as being very biological. And we are biological, but we're much more than biological. And what's really interesting is that we have all these probably underappreciated dimensions of ourselves. So every time physical therapists know this, every time you contract a muscle, this huge burst of electricity comes out. Every time you think, your brain fires in electrical patterns. And we also have a bunch of little clocks in our body. So our major clock is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is the kind of master clock of the brain. But you have all these clock genes in your skin, your liver, your kidneys, everywhere. And these clocks actually will synchronize also to input. And music is one thing they'll synchronize to. So when you listen to music or whatever input you're getting, you're changing these clocks that are changing all these frequencies. So, gosh, this question of what does frequency mean, it's a very complex and deep question. And then we have these resonant frequencies. We have a bio, what do you call that? A bio, that sort of energy that surrounds you. We're putting out information all the time. We're exchanging, if we're in the same room with somebody, we're actually exchanging electrons with them. I mean, this stuff is amazing. People's heartbeats start to sync up. There's all kinds of ways that we really haven't understood about how we're resonant with each other. These are all frequencies, and they're nested inside each other. There's a wonderful article that shows how even in an individual, all these frequencies are nested. And then you have to start to think, well, if our frequency of our stomach is nested with our circadian rhythm and then our brains, and then what else are we nested in that we can't see? Probably a lot of things. We know this with vision. We know there's all kinds of frequencies we can't see, right? X-rays and gamma waves, and I mean, it goes on and on.
Yeah.
So, wow, when you have the answer to that question, let me know. What is frequency to you, Sarah? Are you gonna venture into that? I want to know the answer.
Well, I think there's various answers because we're all looking at the ball or the pyramid or
The
or
elephant, whatever.
the
Yeah.
elephant from a different vantage point because we're all unique sparks of creation. But we ultimately can feel when there's a resonance of truth in that uh, aspect of frequency that we have come to study, know, interpret, explore in depth so that we can build these bridges between them. And in my mind, I feel they're different expressions of the same thing in different aspects. But maybe depending on people's dispositions or interest areas or what their soul is called to do, they're going to venture into different elements of them or not, even so subconsciously. But if it's an active and conscious exploration that they're taking, whether that's as a physicist or a audiologist or a musician, uh, I feel we're moving into a time where there's a very strong opportunity and invitation for us to have more bridges, not less.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we want to say, yeah, but this is my area, that can still be your area. But what if you can acknowledge that that person's got another aspect to the puzzle that could maybe enrich your perspective or expand your consciousness or open up to another dimension that you could bring into your work or bring into your personal practice or your spiritual, emotional, mental
Journey.
development.
Yeah, I totally agree. And as you're saying this, I get this image of the orchestra or so. If the guy, I went to an amazing concert a couple weeks ago, and, if you're a bassoonist, you're not going to try to be the piccolo player. It's it's the piccolo brings something that you're not going to bring, but the beauty of it is when all these things become combined, you have this rich, consonant, deep experience for everybody in the orchestra. It's really quite beautiful when you think about it. And
Mm,
can we use this as an analogy for working with each other and our relationships with each other?
yeah, 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 and authentically honoring those differences and yeah.
I'm curious, like, what about music intrigues you so you were interested in this topic? What do you think it brings to the table?
I think that innately, I feel that music has this capacity to really bypass a lot of the conscious mental faculties that modern humans, if they're in survival or in a highly logical state, can get disproportionately locked into. And I think that we all know innately what it feels like to hear a song from our childhood or our teenage years, or and to be transported back to that place, or to hear relaxing music and to fall asleep. So I feel like it'd be difficult to find someone who doesn't have an embodied example of that kind of experience. And therefore, when people have that kind of embodied example of knowing what something feels like, it can help make that leap of joining these disciplines as you have and being like, yeah, this is why. And this is also what's possible.
And we can be better. Yeah, we can get better at using this intentionally, not
Yeah.
we use music unintentionally.
Yes.
And I think to build on what you're saying, so many historians believe that music came before language,
Mm,
which kind of makes sense, doesn't it? You might hum or sing or grunt
mm,
or
mm-hmm,
beat rocks together
mm-hmm.
before we have language.
Rhythm. Yeah.
And we also have data that people who have dementia retain their capacity to sing or dance or do things to music after language goes. There's something very, very deep about our physiological resonance to music, so much so that people give their whole lives over to music, don't they? I mean, people that are musicians and they're barely eking out a living, but it's this modality is so profound for them that they just have to do it.
Mm,
So I think there's something very deep about this. And if you look at music as a carrier of information, so, you're saying, wow, you hear something from your childhood and it transports you back in time. And not just, oh, I remember, you feel, you feel that. I
mm,
mean, how beautiful is that? And
mm,
then you can access that feeling and what that energetic message is for you,
mm,
and work with that. And I think, especially, so I'm just going to be um, kind of a clinical psychologist here for a minute, which is that if you look at music as an information carrier about the past, and you say to myself, oh, I remember that seventh grade dance when this song plays, and I remember being in the seventh grade, and I remember how weird I felt at this dance because I didn't know how to ask a girl to dance, or I didn't know if it was okay to dance alone, or I didn't. All of a sudden, all this content comes up that now, as an adult, you can start to think about and work with. And it's music that gave you access to that.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
gives me chills just thinking about it because it's
Yeah.
such a powerful conveyor of experience to us. And so
Mm,
I'm kind of talking about how do you use music in the present to help yourself regulate, but there's also all this other stuff where uh, you look at many cultures and music, it becomes a transmission process of information. So you have all these old songs that convey history. ways of
Mm,
coping with reality. And, even if you look at songs in Western culture, so a song like Amazing Grace, so these would be like songs that would be relatively new, speaking, in the last few hundred years, that this song, which started out as a religious song, has gone into the pop genre, it's gone into all these different areas. And what is it about this that is generational? What is it conveying? These things are just really fascinating to think about, and I don't think we have the answers yet. But certainly, if you look at oral traditions, a lot of oral traditions, the information was all encoded in music, right? Music or drumming, dancing. Hmm.
yeah.
They didn't just storytelling. They didn't just say, okay, remember that, Chief so and so did such and so, like we do in history class. Like, that's like the worst way to remember information. But if
Yeah.
you embody it through dancing or drumming or singing, all of a sudden, wow, it starts to become alive.
Yeah, you're engaging all your senses and yeah, really immersing in it. Yeah. Yeah, because it's interesting how depending on the songs we listen to or don't listen to in the transporting back in time, they can activate different states, right? Sometimes states that are not beneficial or states that help us to access an emotion that then we can connect with that we couldn't otherwise, so that we can release that or process it. But it could also mean that people are stuck in some past loops or that they're anchoring, you know, Tony Robbins style, like getting into that state that they want to be in or that they prefer to be in for their future self. So, yeah, so many.
It's very complex, and I one thing I do want to say is that not all music is good for you, right? So
Yeah,
we
yeah,
often listen to music that's bad for us, and
yeah.
a great example of this is people that are anxious. Um, and when you're anxious, you can't sleep at night, so you get exhausted, and then you have to get up the next day and do things. So what do? You're exhausted, so you drink caffeine and listen to heavy, upbeat rock music or something, but it's actually working against what your system most needs. I mean, we have to be compassionate to ourselves because it is a solution. We're looking for a solution, and this is the best we can do, but it's actually not helping us long term.
Yeah.
And so, I think when you become more intentional, and the one thing I've really realized over time is that uh, if you connect to your body, you listen to a song and you start to ask yourself, how is this making my body feel? Most of us don't ask that. We're just like, oh, I like that song, or I don't like that song, or I like those lyrics, or I don't. It's like, how is this actually making your body feel? It'll change everything for you. Because, I mean, I even noticed this practicing. I was practicing the organ the other day, and there's this piece I really like, which is a piece from Pirates of the Caribbean on the pipe organ. It's killer. But it's very fast and dramatic at the end, and you pull all the stops on, and it's just super loud and energizing. And pretty soon my tracker is like giving me points for exercise because I'm getting so such a high level of
Oh,
arousal playing the same thing over and over, right? Because that's what you do when you practice. You play the same thing over for a half hour, 45 minutes trying to get every little nuance right. And I'm like, you know what? This is not good. I need to stop. I need to play something more mellow and work on something more mellow because I'm sending myself out through the roof. And in the past, especially when I was a teenager, I never would have noticed that. Never. Because I was so disconnected from my own physiology. I was
mm.
just like, this is the coolest piece. I'm going to play it forever.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
So I think hooking back into our bodies will really tell us a lot about whether a piece of music is good or bad for us in that moment. Like at times, that piece of music I was practicing is great for me, but it wasn't great for me in that moment.
yes. Yes. Thank you for sharing that because I was going to ask, what are some pointers for people so that they can navigate using music as a beneficial modality or tool and when to sort of discern if they should switch the
I
way
think
they're doing.
that's I think that's the biggest one, and I think if I can add one more, what I would tell you is, you know, and actually, if you hook into yourself, you'll know this. Like, let's say you're totally amped, and you're like, man, I need to relax, so I'm gonna put on "Calm the Storm," the name of our album, or I'm gonna put on some relaxing music. It's probably a bad choice, because you'll go like, oh my gosh, this is boring. Your head will still be spinning. The brain doesn't just go from high activation to low activation like that. What you want to do is ramp yourself down or ramp yourself up. So
Okay.
you're better off. I did an initial album with a guy named Callum Graham. And one of the interesting findings on that is we put some really upbeat music on it. And we collected data with 27 people. And some of them said, when we played these upbeat songs, some of them were like, that song is so relaxing. I really love it. And I'm like, what? How can this be relaxing? Like, it's fast paced, it has electric guitar, it has percussion, it has all this upbeat stuff in it. And yet these people are reporting that it's relaxing. So I went back and looked at their initial brain imaging, and what it turned out is their brains were so activated that when you just put in music a little less activating, they felt it as calming. And that's actually a better choice as ramping yourself down, not just trying to take your brain from the highest to the lowest or the lowest to the highest, you know. If you're depressed, you really don't want to hear "don't worry, be happy," right? It's insulting. You want to hear something that tells you that they understand, you know, it's expressive of where you are, and you feel understood, and you feel acknowledged. I guess you feel acknowledged, and then you slowly bring yourself up out of that state. So those
Okay.
would be a couple things I would just tell people out the gate. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really helpful. It makes so much sense.
It does make so much sense, and yet we don't do these things, you know? I mean, I'm a musician and I didn't start, and a psychologist. You'd think I would have thought about these things earlier, but until you really sit down and get intentional, it's easy to just, oh, there's stuff on Spotify or the radio or my
Mm.
playlist. I'm just going to play through it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious what kind of response you've had professionally in the psychology sphere when you share these ideas.
You know, it's interesting when I've done a couple workshops with professionals, and once I get them there, they're all over it. The problem is getting people to come through the door. And here, what I would say about the traditional, I'll say this about the healthcare system in general, with a couple exceptions. And that is that we're all trained to stay in our lane. So people who do psychology, we get trained in talk therapy and psychological assessment and blah, and we don't open ourselves to other things. People who get trained as physicians get trained in prescribing medication and doing operations. They don't get trained and they're not so open to other things. And then we have insurance that won't pay for other things. And, the story goes on. So it's very hard. I think what I would say is that it's people like your listeners that are going to change the system. If you have to have an operation and you say, hey, I'm going to bring my headphones and I'm going to listen to this music before my operation, or I want my headphones right by my bedside after the operation. And then, there's data that show, by the way, that hypnotherapy, 30 minutes of hypnotherapy before an operation, less bleeding, shorter time in the operating room, all these good things. We've known this a long time. Is anybody doing it? The change is going to come from us, not the traditional medical system. So I would say, in general, although they're intrigued it's hard to get people engaged. The exceptions would be people that are involved in palliative care or hospice,
Mm.
where it's end of life care. And people in traditional systems that work in those areas are much more open to whatever works, right? Prayer, it's fine, right?
Yeah,
Music,
yeah,
it's fine.
yeah.
Anointing with oil, it's fine. And it's so funny. I mean, I guess funny isn't the right word, but it's odd to me that finally, when there's, finally at the end of life or these transitions, it's finally when we allow these other modalities in, when really there's so few side effects to this. Like, is playing music to your little premature baby going to hurt them? It's not going to hurt them. Why aren't we doing this?
Mm.
If someone wants to pray, like, why why wouldn't you create a space for that?
Mm.
It's just it's really kind of funny how we've removed our traditional care systems from all these things that we've known for centuries that used to be part of the healing experience for people. You know, we used
Mm.
to dance and sing around people when they were sick.
Yeah.
We sing lullabies to our babies. There's a reason for that.
Mm. Mm.
It's not just nothing. It's
Mm.
because it changes their physiological resonance and helps them calm.
Mm. 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 Yeah, absolutely.
Just to say one more interesting thing about that. So there's a couple of studies by a neurologist. So there are some people who have gone out there. This guy's name is Robert Turner, and he's a colleague of mine. Lovely guy. Also has a master's degree in piano. And he's done two studies now where they play Mozart underneath the pillows of people who have seizures at night. And it reduced seizures by 80%, because the brain is pacing itself to the music, and so it can't go into a seizure when it's pacing itself to the music. I said, so he goes by Rusty. I'm like, Rusty, like, so are you doing this to all your seizure people? He's like, well, no, because I'm, he's in a traditional practice. I'm like, come on, you should at least tell him about the research. Like, let them try it if they want to. It's these things they're not going to harm you. So it's just so many fascinating findings in this domain.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Stroke and Parkinson's, and I mean, it just goes on and on. And
yeah.
I'm trying to make like a monthly blog on my website that just puts snippets of this research up. The one I put on yesterday is about dementia, and how they just did a study from Australia. Over
Oh,
10,000 people, and it's the study on aging there, and they found that people who listened to music on a daily basis had 36% less probability of dementia. And I think it's because, and there's probably other factors. These are correlational studies, so they're not causal. But it's kind of interesting because music activates so many brain networks at the same
mm,
time. It kind of the logic of it makes sense. So playing and listening to music is a way of keeping your brain, or at least is part of the recipe of keeping your brain healthy.
that's very interesting. I know that Kirtan Kriya has been recognized, I believe, by the Alzheimer's Association of Canada. Canada.
Oh,
Mm.
I didn't know that. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a very simple practice. Yeah, very straightforward and
So
yeah.
many of these things, and then you think about combining them together and the power that creates. Just
Mm,
amazing.
mm, mm. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things to keep our eyes on being excited about that.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's really the beauty of integrative care, and
Yeah.
at least in most Western cultures, well, probably most cultures, period, we haven't gotten very good at that yet. And now we have so much information. It would just be lovely to get all this stuff in one place and start putting it together and say, what would it look like if you created in the neurofeedback world, we call this brain brightening. Like, how do you optimize somebody's brain um, over time? And we know so much now. We know about nutrition, and we know about movement, and we know about music, and we know about some of these other mindfulness and many of these other modalities. I mean, now that would be a cool retreat, right? Just like immerse yourself in all this stuff for a week and see, like, at the end, wow, how do you feel? It would really
Yes,
be something.
be rad. Let's do it.
Yeah, be rad. Okay, sign me up. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So much. Because I think that's what it takes for lots of people to really have a lot of immersive experiences to help them
Mhm.
see how they can join those dots together. Mm.
Yeah, and what's a little hard about science is we tend to do one thing because we want to know whether that one thing has an impact. So you can see the logic of that, but
Yeah.
it gives you something from a logic standpoint, but it doesn't give you the whole picture of what could be done. That's kind of the downside of a lot of the way that we approach science.
Mm. And the honoring of individual paths and individual resonance or non-resonance with certain things, you know?
Yeah, no, boy. I'm so glad you brought that up because really, that little example I gave you is just a tiny example of that, right? Like most of the people found that one song activating, but some people found it calming. Like, this is true personalized approach to healthcare. And we don't like that, right? We want to think that this thing, like mindfulness does this. No, actually, that isn't true. It's interacting with what you're bringing to the situation. The music is interacting with what you're bringing to the situation. Any intervention is. And we're a long ways, I think, from actually appreciating and implementing that. And we see it all the time in healthcare. Some people respond to an antibiotic and other people don't.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But we're not thinking about it in a nuanced way.
Mm. And then sometimes there can be a byproduct of a power inequality or internalized shame for people that things don't work that they're told meant to be working for them or that they should be getting results from or that they're like, hey, this doesn't feel right for me, but they're told that that's what they should do. And
Right. Yes, exactly. And that's what I tell people. If you listen to these songs and they don't work for you, like, don't listen. You don't have to listen. But it's very hard when we learn to be compliant or people teach us, like, this is what it does, and we're like, well, okay, and you really don't want to be in a position of diminishing yourself that way.
yeah, 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 yeah. And I think for a lot of people, particularly depending what cultures or schooling systems they've been raised in, perhaps self-sovereignty hasn't been something that's been anchored very strongly in them and maybe is something that they're rediscovering.
So true. I mean, I can just tell you, growing up as a woman in a traditional, you know, culture in Idaho and the USA, I mean, I learned what my role was supposed to be, and that was to be compliant and respectful and all this stuff. And there's good things about that, but there's a lot of bad things about it because you need to be able to hold on to your own identity and your own path and not get sucked into some of these other messages. So I think you're right. And it's a life's journey for some of us, claiming our own power and our own path and our own, thinking that what we experience actually has validity.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's complicated. It's
Yeah,
complicated.
it
Yeah.
is, it is. And even sometimes when those words are gone, maybe the subconscious and energetic remnants of those resonances that have gone through our culture or our family lineages might still be there and showing up in sideways or subtle ways. Yeah, it can be an interesting one to navigate.
Yeah.
Bob, Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up our chat today?
No, I think that it's infinite what we could talk about.
Yeah,
That's my
absolutely.
final thought. Oh my gosh, there's so much to this. Uh, but I would say, go if people want to learn a little more, go to the website. You're welcome to email me. Welcome to get on the mailing list. I've had some people email me questions. I will always try to answer anything and be helpful in any way I can. And I don't think there's any other substantive thing that I just feel like totally compelled to talk about right now. So we'll leave it at that.
Great. And we'll line up another chat where we can explore your other topics of study as well.
Yeah, that would be fun.